So it's so nice to see some of you I know and some I haven't seen for a while, and some of you I don't know. And thanks very much, Sarah. I'm really happy to be here with Nikole. And I'm going to start by asking her some of the questions that I came up with and some that you guys sent in, and then I'll open it up to questions from you guys. So the first is a two-part question. I want to know, why did you choose journalism as a career? And then why have you chosen to focus on racial inequality?
Okay. It's actually the same answer for both, probably. I got introduced to journalism in high school, and I was bused to majority white high school as part of a desegregation program in my hometown. And our high school offered a one-semester African American Studies course, which I took. And I was complaining to that teacher one day about how our high school paper never wrote about kids like us. And I was, at a fairly young age, I was kind of a nerd, and I was a consumer of news. I was like subscribing to Time magazine, I think, like in 6th grade. And, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a journalist. I liked history and I liked the news. I liked to understand why my world was as it was. So he told me that if I didn't like what was happening in the paper, I needed to join the staff, or he didn't want to hear about it anymore. So I did. I joined my high school newspaper staff. I had a column that was called From the African Perspective and won my first journalism award from the Iowa Press Association. And after that was kind of hooked, because I felt like I very early on realized the power of being able to tell your own stories and to tell the stories of people like you. And by people like me, I meant black folks who typically were not having our stories told, or at least not having our stories told in the full breadth of humanity as you would see other people. I only applied to one college, and that college did not offer journalism. So I went with my second love, or maybe my first love, which was history. And I studied history and then decided that historians write for students and people like myself who just love to read history, but journalists write for the masses, and we also are writing history as it's happening. So I went to graduate school in 2001, and then been a journalist since then.
Okay. And how did you get from that point, at the beginning of your career, to where you are now? Like, if you had to pick, say, 3 things that helped you to be successful, what would those 3 things be?
I would say one is a lesson that I learned maybe a little bit later. I was an older graduate student, maybe like some of you guys. I was 27 years old, still interning, and there were a lot of things that I didn't understand about the business, namely that I thought if you just had really good clips and if you worked really hard, that would open doors for you, and
that's not how it works.
That is not enough, clearly. So I would watch some of students who are much younger than myself and how they would work a room, and I was not comfortable working a room. I was not comfortable networking, and then I realized I was not getting calls back. So I think one of the things that I learned later, but has been helpful, is that you really do need to know someone in institutions often to get noticed by institutions. Mm-hmm. So learning networking, and I started practicing that by going to the National Association of Black Journalists conventions, where I got my first internship out of there. I got my first 2 jobs out of there. So that's been really invaluable, is the mentorship and guidance of other journalists who are interested in helping me out. I think one of the other things is I see stories in a different way, I think, than a lot of journalists that I would be in newsrooms with, partially from my background, partially I think because I was a history major, partially just because of how I saw the world. But so I was willing to tell stories, I think, that stood out. And, kind of I think the combination that anyone who finds some success in their life has, which is working really hard and having a lot of luck.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you see things differently than maybe some other people in the newsroom, what does that mean, like in terms of seeing stories differently?
I mean, I come from a very working class, blue-collar household, a very working class, blue-collar community. I came from a very segregated community, but was bused to white schools. So I think I had to work really hard to get where I was, but I also had an understanding. I mean, I've had family members who have been murdered. I've had lots of family members who have been incarcerated. So because of that, I just had a different perspective of what I would say the typical person in a newsroom. We were not middle class. I saw criminal justice from a completely different angle. I saw it as how it was wreaking havoc on communities and how having a criminal record didn't define my family members. It wasn't definitive. So I just think that background meant that when I was writing about education, I was always writing about the most vulnerable kids. When I was covering county government, I was always writing about the parts of county government that were trying to work on the people who had the least power. So I think I just have always been tuned towards people who had the least power and very skeptical of organizations or people or institutions that we give a lot of deference to, which I think in some ways can work against you as a journalist in a newsroom, because a lot of my stories editors didn't necessarily get. When you're a black journalist and you're pitching these stories, a lot of times people think we wear a bias on our skin, and of course I believe we all have biases, and white journalists have their own racial biases, but for some reason, and there were times in my career where that was a detriment, but I didn't want to be a journalist. If I couldn't write these stories, I would rather not be a journalist, so I persevered, and luckily so far it's worked out.
So yeah, I wanted to ask about that, like pushback from, because as a freelancer, I mean, I'm in a different position, but I get a lot of, like, I'll pitch a story and they'll say, like when I was doing international reporting, I'll pitch a story from somewhere in Africa and it's like, well, we've done an Africa story.
Yes.
Or I'm doing something incarceration, well, we've done an incarceration story. So it's you know, you mentioned getting pushback from editors. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you, especially because you're working in a newsroom, so you have to work with
Right.
them. What do you do?
I mean, at this point in my career, I don't get pushback on stories. But I definitely, until 4 years ago, I mean, was getting a lot of pushback for a couple of reasons. At that time, I was at the Oregonian in Portland, which was a very liberal place, but liberal in the way that you can be liberal when there's hardly any black folks in your town. And so a lot of times the stories that I would push or that I would pitch, the response was, our readers aren't going to understand this. Most of our readers don't look like this. You've already written about, you know, black folks this month. I mean, there was a lot of crazy stuff. And I was there for 5 years, mainly because when I went to the Oregonians, when the bottom completely fell out of the industry and there was nowhere to go. If you had a job at news, you had to keep it. And I was considering leaving. It got to the point where I was actually considering leaving the profession because I didn't understand why. I knew these stories were good. I knew that the stories were important, and it was just a constant arguing with editors to try to get them to accept the stories. What I did learn, though, and I think what has then allowed me to build the career that I have, is that the stories have to be exceptional, that you have to do a great deal of reporting before you ever mention it to your editor at all, so that when you talk to your editor, all of the questions that they're going to have, all the skepticism, you can answer and meet it right away. And it also made me turn towards more investigative, because it's just really hard, even if it's about race and people don't want to talk about race, for an editor to turn down a story that's investigative, that's saying this organization or this elected official was supposed to do this and did this instead, and these people got hurt. So, and so that's kind of, I think, what has allowed me to have success. But at the same time, I'm also by the time I come to New York, our country is changing, right? Like, we've elected a black president, but then we have riots happening. We're having all of these videos coming out of police killings, and then suddenly newsrooms have discovered yet once again that we still have a race problem, which we go through cycles, right? We go through cycles where we think it's important, and then we don't think it's important anymore, and now we're in one of those, we think it's important again. So now, I'm riding high, but you never know how long that's going to last. I mean, our attention to race is very fleeting in this country, so who knows?
Yeah. So you mentioned just now, and also in a piece that you did, talking about diversity in the newsroom, that we all have blind spots, and that it actually is not just the number of diversity, isn't just a matter of having X amount of this kind of people,
right, but
it actually affects the reporting. So what are your own blind spots, and how do you overcome them in doing your reporting?
I don't have any at all. I have lots of blind spots. I mean, I almost report, when I report on race, I'm reporting almost exclusively on the black-white paradigm. And I definitely need to think about it more broadly. I need to cover it more broadly, particularly in a place like New York City. So I think that's a blind spot for me. I don't know, I think I have lots of blind spots. I think that.
But do you have them just in the back of your mind, like you know these are your blind spots, or do you, and you're reporting something and you realize you're getting too into whatever one side is and have to then step back at that moment? Like,
I don't think it's I'm definitely biased. I mean, I think segregation is wrong. I think, it's clear in my, but, if you take kind of the approach to journalism that we're told is that I would not have an opinion on these things whatsoever. And I do, and clearly we all do. And what I always say is, like, a journalist who doesn't have an opinion on what he or she is writing about just doesn't know enough about the topic yet. Like, we all have opinions. What's important to me is, one, is it accurate, and two, is it fair? It's not whether or not I have thoughts on it or feelings about it. And frankly, there's nothing that I write about that I don't have strong feelings about. But my job is to try to be fair. And I think it's hard. I mean, I think it's hard for anyone to say what their blind spots are, because if you know them, they're not blind spots.
fair enough.
But I think that's also why the relationship between reporter and editor is important, because I'm turning in copy sometimes where my editor's like, yeah, you need to calm down and back this up a little bit. But I do like a ton of reporting. I have the luxury of spending months and months and months on something. So by the time I've even sat down to write a word, I just know an excessive amount about whatever it is that I'm talking about. And so I like to think that tends to bulletproof. I'm always wondering, I want to talk to people when I'm interviewing who have an opposite view. I want to read whatever, when I'm writing about school segregation, I'm also reading the research that's saying school segregation is not a problem, and I'm weighing that. So I think that's important as a reporter, but I don't know. I'm sure I have tons of blind spots, but I'm also writing in a field that I have become an expert in, so I just really know a lot about what I'm writing about, which also can lead to blind spots too, right?
Yeah,
Then you're like, I know all of
yeah,
this. But I like to think I'm like constantly educating myself on what it is that I'm writing about. Whenever a new study comes out, whenever a new book comes out on segregation, schools, housing, I'm reading it. So I like to hope that I'm mitigating that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the importance, obviously, of networking, and that also, I like you, believed that just work hard.
You're so naive.
And obviously that's not how that works. So you said you went to the NABJ conference, but there has to have been something more. Like how would you advise, say, some of these alums who might be struggling with networking or even finding a mentor? Like, how do you go about building those relationships that will help you in your career?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely should attend conferences, because people are coming to conferences. I think professional journalists come to conferences expecting that they're going to guide journalists who are coming into the field. And then you have to just do what journalists, it's so weird, right? Because most journalists we're introverts. Like, our job is to talk to people, but we actually hate making small talk if we're not working. So that was like the hardest thing for me, was to be able to like go up to someone and not feel like I'm being fake and trying to like think of little things to talk about. But you have to do that. You have to like go up to someone you admire, whose work you admire, or go up to, the job fair and talk to the recruiters, and then like critically like follow up. So I get requests. I meet people all the time, and they're like, oh, would you be my mentor? And I'm like, I'm mentoring like 25 people right now. But I'm like, okay, call me, send me an email on Tuesday. If you send me an email on Tuesday, we can set up a time to get coffee. That's like my first test. Like, if you can't even like actually do that, I can't invest my time. So I think you have to follow up. You have to like force yourself to make small talk. Think of something interesting to say, because I'm usually like, after like the first two things, I'm like, I've run out. I don't know what else to say. And then really follow up. And like the job I got at the Oregonian, I'd met the recruiter at a college fair. We kind of stayed in touch. I interviewed for this minority fellowship they had. I didn't get it. And so periodically, like every 6 months, if I had a story I was proud of, I would just send it to them and be like, I did this, I really like it, I just want you to look at it. And probably the third time I did that, he emailed me back and he was like, oh, we're getting ready, we're gonna hire for a position and I'd love to bring you out. I don't know that he would have remembered to call me or thought to call me if I hadn't done that, but that's the kind of things that you have to do because, clearly, at these institutions, they're getting tons of resumes, they're getting tons of contacts, they're meeting tons of people, and you have to try to somehow stand out from that crowd. And one way is to just keep, don't stalk people, because that can be annoying, but, every couple of months or something, send an email, send something that you're proud of, and your name just becomes familiar, because how newsrooms hire, which is also the secret that I learned, is people, we're actually quite lazy, and we don't have a lot of money. A lot of newsrooms don't have people who just do recruiting anymore, so what they say is, I have a job opening, and they send an email to their friends, or they send an email to other journalists in the newsroom, and they say, who do you have? How do you get your name on that list of who do you have? And you do that by meeting someone face-to-face, and then following up, and then when someone asks me, sorry, I keep forgetting this microphone is here. I talk a lot with my hands, I get that from my mom. But when someone asks me like, hey, we have this position, who do you have? Then I'm like, oh, Sasha, who's been emailing me and sending her clips, is a great person to send along. If you haven't done that, I don't know you, I'm not gonna think about you, and you're gonna be one of like 500 resumes in somebody's stack. And no one ever gets called that way.
So I want to go back now and ask you, this happened a while ago, and I warned Nikole that I was going to ask her about something that some of you guys might have heard about. So about a month ago at a conference in Boston, Gay Talese asked her how she got her job at the New York Times, and asked in a way, I'll have you relate the story as to how it appeared from your point of view. He said he was misunderstood, but it seemed like he was asking in a way like, well, how did you, Black woman, get this job at the New York Times Magazine? So I want you to first say a little bit about just what happened from your perspective. And then also you said in an interview that that's happened to you pretty much your whole career, like being in a room and having to explain why you should legitimately be there. And I imagine that there are students, again, who, whether it's because of their age or their gender or their race, have similar situations. So how do you deal with that? Like, what do you say in response?
Well, I really am over talking about this, but I'll do it. So, basically we were at a conference. I was a keynote for the opening night. Gay Talese was a keynote for the second day. And so there was a luncheon for keynote speakers. And as we're going in, someone introduces him or me to him. And he gets, he worked at the New York Times Magazine. So his first question is like, how did you get hired at the magazine? And it was just a strange question. Like, I just don't ever feel like white men ever get asked questions like, how did you get this job? I just don't. So my answer was like I said, well, they called and offered me the job. And then he was like, well, who offered you the job? Now I'm like, this is getting ridiculous, So he wanted to know who offered me the job, why did they hire me, and then he wanted to know, he wanted me to list everyone who was on staff at the magazine, which I'm like, clearly you read the magazine, you can go to the masthead. So it was just I have to say, and I when I got interviewed, I did one interview about this.
Yeah, I saw that.
That was it.
Yeah.
Because I tweeted about it. And what I said is, I didn't actually, except for giving kind of snide remarks, I didn't say anything. And that afterwards, I was so angry at myself, because I'm even at this point in my career, I let this man say this and I didn't push back. I felt like many black women, many women in this position where if you push back against someone who's saying something clearly patronizing to you, that then you look shrill or angry or whatever. And so I didn't say anything. And then I left that room and I was just I called my friend and I was like, I can't believe what Gay Talese just said to me. And I was like, you think of 20 smart,
after the
witty ways that you could have taken him down, but you didn't say a single one of those at the time. And part of it is I do think I was bused at a young age to schools where I did not belong. I went to Notre Dame where day one, very wealthy private school, I knew I didn't belong. And so for most of my life, I think it has been that feeling one, internally like I don't belong, and then presenting externally like I don't belong. I mean, you know, Gay Police made a comment to me also about my nails, because he asked me, was I, you know, instead of going to a session, going to go get my nails done. Yeah. But I also, like, clearly, like, I know how, I intentionally look how I look. Like, I know how people would expect a New York Times reporter to present, and I choose not to, because that's not me. And I also think it's important that black girls can see that you can look like a black girl and be intelligent and articulate and have a great job and do great journalism, and that we don't have to dress or look a certain way. So my nails are always popping because that's what I like. And my work speaks for itself. Yeah. So, you know, I think, but at the same time, when this man says this to me, I don't say any of that to him.
I mean, you said you thought of all these witty responses after the fact, but is there, I mean, what do you say in that moment? Is there ever a, if it happened again, do you feel like you'd have something to say that would?
I wrote some things down on my phone, so next time I'll just be like, hold on a second, and I got something for you. I don't know. I think it always catches you off guard. I think it's just amazing how these things can, like, send you back to, like, a place of all your insecurities, and at that moment, it's just like an emotional reaction. So I hope I would have something more witty to say, but I don't know, because it's definitely like it's a putting you in your place. That no one else got asked those questions. I was the only black person in the room. I wasn't the only woman in the room, but no one else got asked those questions. So I'm gonna write. I'm gonna write some stuff down. You guys can tweet me some comebacks, and I'm gonna put them in the notes in my phone.
What kind of backlash or negative feedback, if any, do you get as a result of writing about race and racial inequality?
I mean, I mean, you know, it's like abortion, race, and like gay rights. Those are like the three issues that if you write about them, you can just expect that. You never read comments. I read 5 down, that's my rule.
Oh, that's it.
I read 5 down and then I stop. I just like to gauge kind of what it is. You get crazy emails, but I respond to everyone.
Really?
I really do.
Even the crazy ones?
Even the crazy ones. I'll respond once to, like, the crazy ones. And actually when I was at the News and Observer in my first newspaper job in North Carolina, the columnist there said when people send him, like, crazy insulting emails, he would simply send an email back that says, "You might be right." And I just thought that was brilliant. And so when people send me, like, really crazy things, I send that back and then they never say anything else. It actually works perfectly. But I also understand, like, a lot of people, they're not intentionally sending me, like, racist emails. The emails are incredibly racist, but not intentionally. Mm-hmm. And so I do try to, if I have time, I mean, it was one thing when I was working in the Oregonian, it's another thing when you're at the Times, just the volume of emails that you get. But I do try to respond to everyone. And I try to engage with someone if I feel like they really don't understand something, if they're trying to grapple, because what I'm writing about are things our country has not grappled with and clearly struggles to grapple with, and I understand that, and I understand who my audience is. So if I can try to help them through something that they're grappling with, I will respond. But I do respond to everything, yeah.
Okay.
So you get calls. I mean, you get everything, right? Like, I've only had to block one person on Twitter. I try not to block, because I think that's the whole point of being in an open space, is not to block people. If you call me the N-word, I'm pretty much gonna block you, though. Like, I'm not fucking around with that. Like, that's just too much. But other than that, I try not to block people. I try to engage people who I feel actually are trying to engage. Like, there's trolls, and then I just ignore them, but yeah.
So you've written in some instances about, like, your own personal experiences, and also, you know, talked about being bused for the Piece for This American Life. How much do you share? Like, how do you figure out, like, how much of your life you're gonna share and what you hold back?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm struggling with this. I'm actually working on a piece right now that is both personal and reported, and it's about that school integration battle in Brooklyn that occurred a couple months ago. 'Cause One of the schools was my daughter's school. So this is like the hardest piece I've done. I turned my first draft in maybe in February because I'm really struggling with it. And I'm struggling with it not just because it's personal, but because it's like so personal on the beat that I cover. So I'm like, clearly if there was like any doubt in anyone's mind what I thought about any of this, that doubt will be gone. So I've been very careful. I haven't done personal essay much. I think it's not reporters' jobs to be writing about ourselves, and I also really struggle with that. Like, we are not the most important person. It's the people who we're supposed to be writing about who are the most important people. But sometimes, I mean, for instance, when I did The Ghost of Greenwood, it was about Freedom Summer, and I was actually going back to, I was going to my dad's hometown, which was in Mississippi, which he had never taken us to. My grandparents never took us there. Like, once they left, they left. So I traced it back, and that was personal, but it wasn't on my beat.
Yeah.
So it is hard. Like, I have a Wikipedia page now, which that alone was astounding. And the first Wikipedia page, like, everything was wrong, and it was great, and I was very comfortable with that. But some kindly citizen
fixed everything.
Felt she needed to, like, fix it, and she sent me this email very proudly, like, your Wikipedia page was so bad, but I fixed it now. And now there's, like, it's funny because, like, we're journalists and all we do is, like, tell other people's business, but it's also, like, very hard to have your business out there. And, like, they're like, where my mom is from, where my dad is from, I have 2 sisters, my husband's name, that I have a daughter, like, where I live. And I was like, yeah, I'm not about that life, but it's out there now. So I do think, but it's also humbling because you do really realize, and this is what the Gay Talese thing taught me too, because, I mean, for those of you who don't know, it ended up becoming, like, a big story, including the New York Times.
Yeah,
wrote about me in a knot. So anyway, but it was definitely like, I think I'm a very empathetic person in general, and because I write about vulnerable people, I'm always trying to be very careful that they understand what they're getting themselves into, that they know exactly what's going to be published about them. But being on the other end of that, where you see how little control you do have about what gets printed or written about you, I think has only made me even more empathetic, even more careful, because we do wield like a tremendous amount of power, and I don't think we always recognize that and what that can mean for people's lives. I mean, even in my situation, I could have written a response that would have went out to millions of people, but the average person who can have a story written about them that may be devastating in some way has no power at all to redress that. And I just think that that was a good reminder of that.
So you mentioned your daughter, and I want to ask one last question before opening it up. How has motherhood impacted the way you work, the things you write about, if at all?
Yeah, so I have a 6-year-old, and in some ways, because once I had her, I started doing investigative work, which you can work really regular hours, at least at the office, because you're not doing breaking news, but then it gets like real crazy at the end. So I think I have a husband who has to do a lot more work, I think. And I travel a lot, so when I'm home, I do have a lot of guilt about being away. She's got like this huge stuffed animal collection because every time I'm gone, I pick her up these little Beanie Babies in the airport that she now expects because it's like my little guilt offering. But I do think it's hard because women, you know, we do have a particular caretaking role, and this is like, I'm traveling probably like 5 to 6 times a month, and sometimes for short periods, sometimes for long periods. I miss things. I miss daily things. Like, the school doesn't really know me. They know my husband. All the kids know my husband. They don't know me, which is like a dagger to the heart sometimes. I'm going to a conference in June, and I was supposed to give the Saturday keynote, and then I had to cancel because my daughter's first recital was that day, and I was like, I'm her mom. Like, her dad cannot be doing her hair for the recital. I have to be there. So I do think it's a sacrifice for every working mom, and that's why in some ways I never feel like I can complain, because there's so many, like, in my family, women who are making, $8 an hour who are having to do this on their own, and I'm not making $8 an hour, and I'm not having to do it on my own. So I don't know, I'm just never going to be the one to talk about how hard it is because I still have it pretty easy, and if I really had to, I could pay someone. I think the hardest thing for me is just that, like the time, will I look back one day and regret how much time I haven't spent with her? But then there was a study that came out that said actually like girls whose moms are like working moms like do great. So I'm like, okay, I'll be okay. And I've taken her, like she's seen me on TV. I've taken her to like NBC with me. She's got her makeup done and like the thing, and she thinks that's so cool. And I think it is really great for kids to see their moms doing important work and to have an understanding about that. But you cannot have it all. You can have parts, pieces of a bunch of things, but you can never have it all. You can't just lean forward.
Yeah. And on that note, anyone have any questions for Nikole?
I just was curious, what was your favorite story this year? What story excited you the most, whether you worked on it or read it or, was just big in the news? Like, what excited you this year?
I was going to say, I only write like 3 times a year, so. The story that excited me most is the series that won the Pulitzer out of the Tampa Bay Times, which was on failure factories in Pinellas County. It was about how the district resegregated schools and then turned these black schools into failure factories. And it excited me for lots of reasons. One, 4 years ago, no one was writing about school segregation at all. And to see just fabulous reporting, investigative reporting on school segregation that wins like the highest prize in journalism, just personally was extremely gratifying because that's been like my obsession, like my mission for the last 4 years. So I just thought if you guys have not read it, it's a phenomenal piece of journalism. And it's the kind of journalism where you're like, we should have been doing those stories a long time ago. Because what made the piece so fantastic was every excuse that the school board made, which we all accept about why poor black kids don't achieve in school, they investigated every single excuse and showed that every excuse was a lie. And we don't do that in education reporting because I don't know that we actually think poor black kids can achieve the same as other kids. So I think we accept, oh, it's poverty, oh, it's the parents, oh, it's this. When really, some of the stuff you can just test out. And that's what this series did, and it was fantastic. So that's probably my favorite piece.
Here we go.
When you used to do investigative journalism, I'm wondering if anyone has ever confronted you about a story that you worked on, or maybe anyone ever tried to threaten you about a story you did, and how would you handle such a situation?
So I wish someone, I don't know why, I feel like that would be the pinnacle of my career. Someone either arrested me or threatened me, as long as they didn't actually harm me.
Be careful what you wish for.
I know. I said as long as they didn't actually harm me. No, I've never been threatened, but I've certainly had people very angry about what I've written. People who have threatened to sue me but didn't. So I think that, the very nature of investigative reporting is you are exposing things people don't want exposed. But what also is true is if you are a good investigative reporter and doing your job properly, nothing that you print is a surprise to anyone. So every allegation you're going to make, you have given that allegation either to the person in an interview or in writing, and they have had a chance to answer it, and they know what's going to go in. And it doesn't mean that people aren't going to be angry ultimately, but they're not surprised. And they also cannot come out of their pocket with some evidence that could have disproved your whole theory. So I think that's all that you can do. The most recent thing was I did a story on resegregation in Tuscaloosa a couple years ago. And I basically showed how a black judge did a backroom deal with the white elite in the town to resegregate the schools. And he's still a sitting judge, and he was not happy. And tried to say he was going to sue us for libel and that it was wrong, but then being that he's a judge and he never did it, I assume it meant because clearly I had him on tape. So it wasn't. But I think that's just the nature of it. And how you handle it, how I handle all of it is like Beyonce, just always say, stay gracious. I think, one, I'm always extremely careful about how I respond to anything in print, because anything that you text or email, best believe, can be published. I'm careful about whatever I say to people. I think you always have to be as professional as possible, no matter how unprofessionally someone is treating you. One, because that's just the standards of good journalism, but two, in this day and age, things will come back to bite you. But no one's ever threatened me, thank goodness. I was only playing, I don't want anybody to threaten me. I wouldn't mind getting arrested for doing my job, though. That would be kind of cool. Well, somebody has my bail money.
Put that in your notes.
Exactly, yes.
First, congratulations on the Peabody.
Thank you.
This year.
I
I'm
have
curious.
like 4 dresses at home right now. I'm trying to decide which one. I was just gonna wear a dress out of my closet, but then my husband was like, "It's the Peabody," and I'm like, "If you're telling me to shop, I'm gonna do it." So.
I'm curious, since I think this was your first radio piece that you did with This American Life. When I'm just
Kind
curious,
of, yeah.
a little about having your career focused in print reporting, how you are adapting to the new sort of landscape, and if you're looking at experimenting with more audio, more video, whatever else.
Yeah, no. I mean, when I was at the Oregonian, it was like, in this crisis stage for journalism, and they were wanting journalists to do everything. They were wanting you to film your own video, shoot your own photos, and write, and blog. And I did it because I wanted to have a job, but I didn't like it. I'm pretty much a print purist. Even with radio, I just conducted the interviews and I wrote the script, and then I spoke the script. But I wasn't the producer. I still was doing print, basically. I did things very I mean, you have to ask questions in a different way when you're on radio, but I did my job very much the same. I love print. That is what I want to do. I think that some people are good at doing a bunch of things. I think I prefer to just focus. I mean, I'm only writing 3 things a year. I clearly need to just focus on one thing. But not everyone's like that. And I'm also, a bit older, and I think I came up in journalism where you just focused on one thing, and I think that's not the way the journalism schools teach anymore, probably for the better. But at the same time, I pitched the piece of This American Life because I also always, even though I've never done radio, I heard it as a radio piece. I just I felt like, I don't even know why, I just felt like it was a radio piece. But the skills were I mean, there's some things you write in a different way. You have to write much simpler when you're doing radio than you would. I mean, sometimes I look at some of my sentences for the magazine. I'm like, this had 12 clauses in it. You can't do that for print. But yeah, not me. I think I really do love print. I'm going to do more radio, but long form. I mean, even when This American Life thing was long, it was like a full hour. So I think I like long form. I only like things. I don't like writing anything short anymore, which is probably like most journalists, but I just actually don't have to write short. But I really like to spend time and really be able to I don't like writing anything superficially about race, because I think our country just has such a terrible understanding of it, that I can never just write about this thing happened today. As I always joke, I always have to go back to 1619 in every story, much to my editor's chagrin. This story only goes back to 1949 though, so not too bad. And so if I can do radio where I can do that really long form, and even This American Life piece goes back to the 1940s. Originally, it went back to 1800s, but they cut some of that. They cut that part out. If I can do long form radio, then I'm interested in that. But if not, then I'm not. And video, I feel like I have a particular skill, and I think videographers, photojournalists have particular skills. I just don't think everybody can do it great. And I'm like, you're trained to do that. You are a talented photographer. I am not. I can shoot a great Instagram picture. That's as far as I can go. So. As long as I can be employed and not have to do those things, that's what I prefer to do. Now, if they told me, I might not have a job if I didn't adapt,
So you start doing
I can be very adaptable.
Okay. I wanted to ask about writing about civil rights and writing about education and race for such a prestigious institution, and may not be serving your work up to the people you want, an audience you may want to hear this to, and may not have access for whatever reason to it. Can you talk about maybe some of the challenges with that, and maybe what you do to still try to reach the audience this affects, as well as the audience that should learn about it?
That's a great question. I think that is probably the thing I struggle with the most. And I actually think most of what I write, I'm not writing for the people who are being affected by it. I'm writing for the people who can do something about it. But I talk about this with Jake Silverstein, who's the editor of the magazine, a lot. I'm like, the things that we're writing, like, the people we're writing about don't read the New York Times magazine. When I did the story on resegregation in Tuscaloosa, that was in the Atlantic magazine. People I was writing about was not reading the Atlantic magazine. And I think that is definitely the struggle of working for mainstream media, and particularly elite mainstream media, because if I were writing for the Tuscaloosa News, lots of black folks in that community do read the Tuscaloosa News. So like in my neighborhood in Bed-Stuy, you can't even get the New York Times. You can get the Daily News, you can get the Post. And I don't know the answer on how to mitigate that, because even when you're getting wide sharing on social media, that's a certain sector of the black population. It's still not reaching the masses, and certainly not reaching, most of the parents in the poor segregated schools that I'm writing about. What I can say long term, completely off the record, no, I'm playing. People do that and really expect it's going to be off the record sometimes. I would love one day to have my own publication. I think the demise of a strong black press, I think, has been very problematic for our democracy. And we do have a black press, but it's not doing investigative reporting. It's not doing real reporting. It's mostly doing entertainment and aggregation, or it's extremely small with maybe one or two staff writers. So one day, if I could turn my success into anything for like the public good, it would be that, where you could have a strong publication with enough money that you could actually hire the best talent, because this is why we don't have a strong black press, is because you can't compete on salaries, and really cover the stories and reach the communities who you're writing for and about. But that's unless we're going to pass the hat right now, that's going to be down the road. But I do think that that's a problem, and I think it's a problem that a lot of us journalists working in this institution struggle with. Do you have any solutions?
I'll let you know if I do.
Okay. The easy thing is, it would be great to just, I don't know how the New York Times even determines distribution. I don't know how our neighborhood doesn't get the New York Times, but that could help. Though I'm still not sure people would select it, because part of it is chicken and the egg, right? We don't write to them, so they don't read us, and because they don't read us, we don't write to them. And I don't know how we solve that. So maybe the answer is start your own institution.
I just wanted to ask you about the This American Life piece, how you chose your subjects. I thought the mother-daughter relationship was really, really compelling, and we could tell from your reaction to how they spoke to one another.
Yeah,
and
I'm
how
completely jealous of them.
Yeah, it sounded amazing. But if you don't land that perfect subject, how do you make it work? And when you do, how do you keep that relationship? I don't know. Is it dangerous to fall in love with your subjects?
I don't think we should ever be looking for the perfect person, because people are not perfect, and our story shouldn't pretend that. And I think a lot of times, particularly when we're writing about people of color, it's either like the angel or the devil, or like and we're neither. Like, no one is neither. How I found them was a bunch of parents had sued the state because when this transfer law got into place, then the state tried to change the rules to send the kids back, and they got sued. So I just contacted the lawyer and asked for a bunch of the plaintiffs, and then talked to a bunch of the plaintiffs, and fell in love with Seem Strong, but was very compelled by Nidra and Maria. So, I mean, it's pretty typical the way that we all find our sources. And if they hadn't worked out, then I would have found someone else and it would have been a different story, but it still would have been a good story. Luckily, they were pretty amazing. I mean, they made for great radio. And I think what was most important to me was to get a student who could really speak to what segregation was doing to her and how it was depriving her of the promises and opportunities that we have. And that can be hard to find, because I mean, in high school, I don't know how thoughtful I was about these types of things. And so I lucked out with her, because I interviewed other kids, and there's another young lady in the piece as well who was also thoughtful, but spoke much more in the dialect, and I thought her voice was just as important, but we were never able to get her mom in an interview, and so there are other reasons why she wasn't as much a part of the story. And is there a danger of falling in love with your subjects? You should never fall in love with your subjects, because I think it's hard to write someone in a true way if you're in love with them. But I do definitely get an emotional attachment to the people I write about. I spend a lot of time with them. I have a lot of empathy. As a journalist, I share things about myself when I'm interviewing, because I've never felt right about the one-way exchange. It just doesn't feel right to me. If I'm asking you to tell me very personal things and I share nothing with you, I just never believe in that. And I think because of that, I get really good things from subjects. And so because of that, you do have a relationship. But it's also important to always be clear what the boundaries of that relationship are, because if you let your sources think that you're friends, they share things with you inadvertently that they don't intend to be published, and I never want to be in that position.
You mentioned before you got to the Times that you went through a period where you were trying to do everything. I guess, and you weren't necessarily getting to write the stories that you wanted to write. So how did you sort of push through that period and to get to where you are today?
I mean, journalism it is my calling. I mean, it feels really weird to say that. Like, I feel kind of like a loser when I say that, but
Why?
it sounds so quaint, but it really is. Like, I cannot imagine not doing this, and so. Even as all of my friends were leaving the industry, even as I was extremely frustrated, I just couldn't imagine, like, what other job would I do? Because I really do feel like this is my missionary work. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. So how I pushed through it wasn't. I mean, there's some days it was ugly. There were some days where I felt depressed. My husband was like avoiding me because he didn't want to hear another like sad story about how bad my day was. There were times when it was really hard. And I think what kept me in it was I really could not think of what else I would do. I mean, other people were looking for jobs. A lot of people were going to like communications jobs or PR jobs. I didn't want to do that, and I could not think of what else I would do. And I did what all journalists do, because even if you're not having to do a million things, you all have your daily demands, and you all have the work that you have to do, and then you have the work that you want to do. And so I was always, like all journalists, working behind the scenes on the work that I wanted to do while I was doing what I had to do. And it was the work that you want to do that keeps you going. But, this industry is not getting any easier. And I'm in a very lucky position now, but I also realize tomorrow I could not be. And so I enjoy it while I can, but I'm also very adaptable. And as long as some of the time I can do the work that I think is most important, I can't imagine not doing anything else. So you have to persevere, and you have to save pieces of yourself. And it can mean working on your own time, which I'm like the least working and not getting paid person you've ever met. Like, I don't believe in that. But sometimes you have to do it. I mean, if you feel called to do it. I don't think you should on like principle. I think whenever you're working, you should be getting paid for it. But there were times in my career where that was the only way I could do the work that I was called to do, and I did it. But then it paid off, and now I never work unless I'm getting paid. So,
That should be a lesson to you all.
yes, definitely get paid for your work.
For your work, yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for being here with us.
Of course.